for my background, I'm working with the dominantly inherited Alzheimer network for several years now as a site PI. I also lead the local Munich Downs cohort. And for both these populations, it is common that they inherit in the autosomal dominant Alzheimer cohort 100%. In the case of Down syndrome, most of the individuals, genetic changes that will ultimately cause Alzheimer's disease in these individuals. And that makes it on the one hand, a very high medical need to find solutions for these populations to be able to treat them effectively, that they do not develop clinical Alzheimer's disease. And on the other hand, the strong predictability, the strong way to predict, or possibility to predict the occurrence and also the onset, or the time of onset of the disease, enables us to understand the diseases much better. So for Diane, and now for the most recent Down cohort, the strategy was to include individuals before their disease onset and follow them into the disease and look at biomarker changes, subtle cognitive changes, subtle other changes, and get a good feeling about what is the stepwise process, how follow things to each other into a full-blown Alzheimer's disease. And that enables very new and modern ways to treat these individuals, because we can really know when molecular processes take part that might be target to an intervention. So that's why these populations are so attractive for treatment studies, especially. And that is one very important piece of the information I try to deliver. The other key question is, how similar or different are the genetic cases from the sporadic cases? And of course, there are very important differences. And the most important difference is the age of onset. But if you get to the clinical disease scores, especially if you compare autosomal dominant Alzheimer's disease with sporadic Alzheimer's disease, they are largely very, very similar. There are some very subtle differences in some individuals, but the vast majority of the cases for sporadic and autosomal dominant have the same clinical picture. They have memory loss, orientation difficulties as a beginning, and then as the pathology, especially the tau pathology, spreads to the brain, they get more and more disabled cognitively, but also later with other diseases. So for example, my group and I have studied the movement disorders part of this disease quite a bit. That has not been so much in the focus of the research so far, but it's interesting per se. And so these diseases are on a clinical level very, very similar. And on a molecular level, they are also very similar. First, they develop a better pathology that we get to measure with PET scans and CSF, for example, most recently also with blood tests. This is followed by changes of tau very early in the blood, close to simultaneously. I think there are many things to be understood still, but this is also very similar between sporadic and autosomal dominant. And later you get changes in tau in the CSF, in tau species there. And so this is all very similar. Also other aspects of the pathology, like inflammatory aspects, are very, very similar. So if you then go to the end of the disease and to histopathology of brains. In most cases, if you do not give the pathology additional information, if you just have him examine a brain he doesn't know anything about. I'm not a neuropathologist, but I would still argue that most neuropathologists would be unable to tell if they have a genetic case that they're looking at or a sporadic case. So that again speaks largely to the similarities of these diseases. If a pathology just cannot distinguish them in just immunohistochemistry and histology examinations. Of course, if he takes the genetics into account, differences become obvious. And so, in a nutshell, I think these similarities, clinical course, and the molecular and histopathological similarities speak very loudly to the fact that we can use the genetic cases where we understand and can predict the time course much better, very nicely to inform the research also for the sporadic Alzheimer's, which on an epidemiological level and an overall level, of course, is the much more important disease because it's just so frequent.